So you've decided that you want to embark on the journey of painting or repainting your car yourself, and maybe you don't know exactly where to start. Now, I don't plan on covering technique like how you sand it and how you paint, but basically the steps of what it takes from starting from the bare metal all the way to the final step of clear coat or your single stage paint. There's a lot of things that go in between that maybe you don't know, or maybe want to fill in the blanks before you make the decision whether you want to try to conquer something like this yourself or not. That's what we're going to get into here today. Hey, my name is John. It's your first go around here at the Vinyl Village Garage. What we do here is restore cars. Particularly, I like my fibers, but this stuff applies to all makes and models and whatnot. And what's better than doing one car? Doing two at the same time, right, guys? Well, I guess gals too. If you guys are getting in here doing your cars and whatnot. But what we're going to get into here is painting a car. Now, I've been working on doing two cars because I've had a problem with my paint supply. I've actually tried to get a hold of Amazon 3 different times, and they've failed to deliver my high build primer. So in the meantime, if you guys haven't seen much happening, I've been doing body work on two cars, trying to fill in the blank or burn some time up. But now I'm going to get back on project, but I figured I would do something about painting a car. Someone asked, what's the steps? I've sanded my car down. What do I do next? I mean, do I just put some paint on it? What kind of paint do I use? And that's what we're going to go over here today. But we're going to start with maybe step one. Let's call step one is preparing the car. I'm going to assume you're going to go to bare metal. We're not doing a Corvette. We're not doing a Saturn. We're not doing a DeLorean or something like that. Something that has a different kind of base besides regular old steel. Now, you don't necessarily have to strip it to bare metal. I guess you need to make that decision to begin with. I like to go to bare metal, so I know that's a great foundation when building a house. You want to really know what's underneath all that, just my opinion, and then build up from there. So if you've gone to bare steel, there's only a few ways to get there. You can chemically, paint stripper to scrape the paint off. You can sand it with a dual action sander or a hand sand it, so you're mechanically removing the paint. Those two techniques, once you get the paint all off, you will need to acid etch or metal wash the steel down before applying any kind of a top coat. It's going to neutralize any rust and also prepare the metal for a good bond of the paint that you're going to use. Now, if you go to media blasting, that's my preferred method. You can go directly to paint. You can skip over the metal prep steps. That's step one, stripping the metal and preparing it for paint. Now, the next step is going to be when that bare metal is all prepped and ready, you need to decide whether you're going to go self-etching or epoxy primer. I like epoxy primer. Self-etching is probably a good product. I've never used it, so I can't tell you the pros and cons of that, but epoxy works good. It is watertight. You don't have to worry about it as long as you don't open the surface. It'll be good to even store the car for a while that way. And plus, you can start putting your body filler directly on top of that epoxy primer. It's a great foundation. Never mix epoxy primer and self-etching primer. You put one or the other on top, it doesn't cure right, and you'll have bonding problems. So if you decide to go one way, stick with it. But we're going to go epoxy primer. That's what you're going to put over your bare metal. That's our base layer. Then you're going to jump into doing some body filler work like you see here. Now, body filler has its purpose. It fills in blemishes. These metal panels are 50 plus years old. They're not perfect. They've had people jump on them, drop it, kick it. There's going to be issues with the panels. Like you see a little dent here has been filled in. The top has some issues. You can see it's not thick. You're going to try to keep this stuff like credit card thickness or less. Now, everything at this point, as you can see, I'll show you here. This is epoxy primer. It just has a layer of dust on it where I was doing body work. Now, what I'll do is just kind of scuff that lightly, put my body filler on, then I start block sanding it. And then I'm going to work everything right now to begin with something pretty heavy, almost 80 grit sandpaper to get everything all shaped in right. So if you look carefully here in the body filler, you'll see the sand scratch marks in that. That's not okay to put primer on top of. You're going to keep working that panel until you can get it stopped at about the 220 mark. You don't want anything really heavy as for sand marks. I wanted you to see this because so the next thing is once you get your epoxy primer on and body filler finished to about 220, then at this point it's okay to put your high build primer over this. The problem with putting high build primer over the deep sand scratch marks is you're going to see this halo come back through, and even the sand marks can eventually bleed back through because that high build primer shrinks and contracts a little different rate than body filler. So you really want to keep all the sand scratch marks removed with body filler for the best possible results. Now, some people say you just dump 4 or 5 coats of high build on there and block it out. It'll look fine. It does look fine for a while, but I'll tell you from my experience, you'll see some bleed through of this sanding marks later on. You're going to regret not going ahead and trying to finish that just a little better. And of course, with that being said, some people, the old school way was you put your body filler on, then your primers. Body filler chemistry has changed a little bit over the years. It's not it's corrosion resistant, I guess you could say. I was always told put it on top of epoxy primer, but again, do your technique on that, how you feel. But I like the idea of being the entire car sealed up with epoxy. So if I were to nick or scratch this car, heaven forbid, because I drive them, you don't have an open way for water to get into the base metal. So if it does pop through the top layer, gets into your body filler, it will never cut through to your bare steel underneath because you've got that layer of epoxy. So I like that stuff being in there. So that was a little side note there for you. So now at this point, we use your imagination. We've got this car all blocked out with 220. Now we're going to go ahead with a high build primer. Now there's several types, polyester, polyurethane. I like the polyester stuff. It seems to have less problem with shrinkage. Back to the whole sanding mark issue. I've had cars I painted, and 4 or 5 years later, I start seeing the sanding marks. I kept trying to figure out the why. Well, these are some of the things I want to share with you. I've gone now to the polyester primer, and I have not seen that. So, much happier with my white TransAm. That thing's 5 years old, the paint job. Paint looks phenomenal. It's one of the first cars I used the polyester stuff on. Never going back. Just, again, my personal preference. So, now we've got our 3 coats of high build primer on the car. That's what you see here on Project Mockingbird. It has the coats of high build primer. Now this car needs to be blocked out. Now we're going to block the whole thing. Probably start with the 220, kind of where we left off at. And as long as everything's coming out really nice, then I'm going to bump up to 320 sandpaper. And 320 sandpaper is good enough at that point to go to the next step. If you're using a solid base color or solid color, like not a metallic paint. If you're going with a metallic paint, I would probably go as far as 400, maybe 600 grit before putting your sealer coat on. The thing about metallic, it has flake in it, and it wants to flip-flop following the contour. So if you have any sand marks, anything poking through, it actually will highlight those sand marks and make it look even worse. So with that in mind, metallic paints, maybe a little finer grit sandpaper before jumping to the sealer coat. Now, I've been working on block sanding this. This is 220 grit sandpaper. I use the powdered guide coat here. I love this stuff. That's the first car I've used this on. I don't normally use any guide coat, but for visibility, for videoing, I thought maybe I would use it. And I'm telling you, I really like it, but you'll see some stuff that I missed. I didn't get out when I'm doing the body filler stage. Not the end of the world. We can still put a skim coat of filler on it, but that's what that guide coat does. It highlights all the blemishes. Areas that doesn't need any more sanding, you'll see it looks relatively smooth. This is my high build primer. This is my white epoxy. I used white on this car underneath that. And these are the areas here that still need some work. Now this part here, it feels rough enough that I'll probably put a skim coat of body filler on, this is what I use here. And then fill in these little blemishes and still go back with 220, then clean that up. Now I should have done a better job prior to, but again, I'm not perfect, you know. This is how it's going to work out. I'll fill those areas here, and then I'll probably come back and put another coat of high build on. Now, if you got areas here where you've poked through to bare metal, you really need to put a coat of epoxy or something back on that, just in my opinion. Or some of your high build primers, check your paint data sheet. Check this out, look kind of like these right here. Some will say DTM or direct to metal. In that case there, it should be okay to put it onto bare metal. It's probably fine, but if it was me, I'd probably touch up the oldest spots there with a little bit of epoxy. So let's use your imagination. Project Mockingbird is ready to be painted, right? Or all this is started. The high build primer has all been sanded out, no more blemishes, showing up with our guide coat, ready to be sealed up with a sealer coat. Now you might have checked the data sheet that says no sealer coat required on top of that high build primer. That might be true, but again, I would suggest going with a sealer coat. Because we even showed you here when it kind of burned through, the epoxy turns white, that primer is gray. You're going to have a little bit of color change. If you're putting a light color, any color, it can cause a color difference. So a sealer coat is going to give you a uniform base, so your color coat goes on nice and even and doesn't have weird maybe splotches bleeding through in case you do have an issue with underneath. And not to mention this sealer coat, if there is any exposed body filler or metal or something you just can't see, it prevents the paint from soaking in and causing highlights or issues or ghost circles or rings, whatever, in the paint when done. So I like going with a sealer coat, and then of course then the paint lays on really nice. Now the thing about a sealer coat is I use the epoxy primer. I reduce it about 10% typically with acetone. Again, check your paint data sheets. Any manufacturer will provide those for you. But then what you do when you put that sealer coat on, you paint 1, maybe 2 coats on, nice and even and smooth, but do not sand or touch or do anything to that sealer coat. That is your base for your paint. Once that flashes off, you start working on your paint. But let's just say you have some blemishes or some minor sand or dust nibs. You want to sand it out. Try to refrain from doing that unless it's really bad. You don't want to touch that sealer coat. And then once your sealer coat has flashed off, then go ahead and proceed with your base coat. If you're going to base clear or single stage paint, put just a light coat of your color on the entire car, and then check for fish eyes, blemishes, anything kind of weird, anything in between there. And then if you, like I said, use your imagination. You've got your one coat on, you find some kind of blemishes you don't like, and once a coat of base coat is on the car, it's okay to lightly sand a little bit on that base coat. Say if you got some dirt or dust nib or something in it and you don't like it, you can sand on the base coat just a little bit and it won't hurt a thing, but that's going to smooth out your foundation. And if everything looks good, proceed with putting 2 to 3 coats of base coat on top of your first coat until you get nice even coverage on the entire car. And I like having the car all put together. Let's say if you were painting this a metallic paint color, anything with metallic flake, which the metallic flake kind of follows the grooves of the sand marks. Same thing, if you have this fender mounted on the car this way and the door this way, and you paint it as an assembly, I can almost promise you the color will match end to end. But if you take that door and flip it up on some sawhorses and paint it metallic color, and then flip it this way, the flake will flip-flop and may change the tone or the color of the paint. So metallic cars, I like to paint fully assembled. That's a different challenge, but something to keep in mind. That metallic flake can be finicky, but this car being that it's going to be solid white, you're going to see that I'm probably going to take this car apart and paint it in pieces and then assemble it. All right, so once you got all your base coat on or your single stage paint, your 3 to 4 coats on, let that stuff dry. If you're going to go with clear coat, go ahead and let the same follow the paint instructions, but typically 20-30 minutes between coats, depending on the humidity, blah, blah, blah. Basically wait for it to tack off. You can touch a piece of the tape somewhere and make sure it's not super sticky or coming up with your finger, then hit it with the next coat. Then go ahead and proceed with your clear coat, and then you should be all good to go and painted and done. Just that easy, right? Yeah, pretty much. Now this car here behind me, my back in black, there's your clue what color we're going to paint this thing. High school car. I painted this black in my parents' backyard back when I was in high school. Boy, did it look okay. Actually came out really good. First car I painted on, first car I welded. I decided it was worth doing over again. That's what you see here. We're going to paint it back to black. Now black, the darker the color, the more particular you need to be on your bodywork. It's going to highlight things. It's going to be the reflection. It really shows you the depth of the bodywork, because we know the paint on top isn't what makes the paint job. It's what's underneath. So on this back in black car, I gotta be really particular on doing all my body work. I probably stop at 600, etc. Then put my paint on. But I'm gonna do something a little different. I'm gonna paint this in pieces. It's a solid black paint. There's no metallic in it. But then I'm probably going to put my base coat, clear coat like described, and then I'm going to try doing something called flow coating. I've been reading about that, learning about it, never done it, but I'm going to try to get the clear coat to put on that clear coat lay on really slick. Now that's basically the same clear coat, cut it with a little bit more reducer to help reduce orange peel, but you got to be careful because it runs. But we're going to give that a go. We're going to give that a shot. Hope that's going to work out. And of course, you want to see that all work out. Hey, if I shared something that's helpful to you, or you want to see that happen, please subscribe to the channel. I like to see this thing keep growing, and I know it doesn't happen without you. And a couple of things I want to leave you here with before I get out of here. Tape. Never leave a tape like that on a panel. I've seen it, and it's happened. The adhesives in the tape sometimes can wick out into your paint surface. Then, of course, it turns into a dust magnet. And then if you don't get it cleaned up or don't sand it or get it out of there, you'll see this perfect ring in your paint job. The other thing is, keep your hands off the body where best you can. Gloves, keep things washed. Now, Windex was a real nice product for wiping down a car before painting it. Rubbing alcohol isn't too bad, but sometimes it causes a static charge. The other thing you'll never see me do, see the shop floor? Yes, it's dusty and dirty. This is my sandblasting booth, paint working bay, and my paint booth. So but the reason I bring that up is it's a mess. But I will sweep the floor up, but you'll see that I will never put water on my shop floor. Now, this is probably going to raise a few eyebrows. Some people are going to shake their head, but let me explain to you the why, and then maybe you understand and you make your own decision. But the water you dump on that floor changes the humidity here inside my paint booth. And that humidity can cause fish eyes or problems or hazing in the paint. I would rather deal with a small bit of dust if it gets in the paint from my floor as opposed to a finish that is destroyed because of humidity. Now, do what you want with that information. But some of the things I do to combat the dust on the floor: clean it up, sweep it, blow the garage out. Compressed air is your friend in this situation. And you'll also see in the cars I've done in the past that I will jack the car up off the floor, put it on jack stands, so I'm not anywhere near the floor blowing air on the floor to stir the dust up. And I also tape the car from the rocker panels down to the floor. Same idea. I try to tape up as much as possible. Like on the coupe, I tape everything off that I don't want paint getting on, not just because I want overspray, but also reduce the amount of dust getting stirred up in the air, which lands back into my finish. Because, again, we do all this stuff right here in this 2-car garage. It doesn't mean you can't get a car that looks really super sharp and super clean. It just means you got to do a few extra steps. And that was the point of this video. So maybe you get some kind of an idea of the steps to painting your own car. You understand some of the behind the scenes things to get a good foundation to make things happen there on your paint job. So nonetheless, I'm going to get done, get back to sanding on the cars here because that's the most fun. I reordered my high build primer and hopefully it'll be here. I can get both these cars all backed up in high build, then block them out and start doing some paint work. And I need to get this off of there. And nonetheless, hope you guys found this stuff helpful and useful. Anything you'd like to see, let me know just the same. But I will grab the camera and we'll catch you guys next time.